Okay, so today we will talk about Elia. This is another city in, at the time, what they called Greek world. However, today it is actually Italy. There's a little map of the southern Italy. This is where Elia is. If any of you guys know Italy, it looks like the boot, right? It looks like the boot which kind of kicks Sicily. Sicily is like this little chunk there. So this is where Elia is, and this entire area, which is today Italy, back then was populated by the Greeks, the Greek colonies. They were moving there and living there from the mainland, which of course is the origin, and today mainland Greece is Greece, but this is Italy. So note that it is completely different part. Right, Miletus and Ionia, this is today Turkey. This is a completely different part of Mediterranean region. First we will talk about Xenophanes. Xenophanes is a very interesting figure. He is considered by many scholars to be the founder of Eleatic school. And why? It's kind of hard to say because other scholars disagree, but hopefully you will see at least one reason why once we get a little bit deeper into that. He lived around 570 to 470 BC, which makes 100 years. We don't know if he lived exactly 100 years, which is possible. By the way, did you notice they actually lived quite a long time? Many of them died in their 70s, 80s, 90s. So I guess this fresh air and all natural produce they were eating was helping. Anyway, so Xenophanes may have even lived 100 years. He is a native of Ionia. He was actually born there and lived there until he was 25, but then he had to move and settled in Sicily. So quite a far away, nonetheless. So he is philosophically minded poet, what we may say. He mainly is a poet, but his poetry, which a lot of it is preserved actually, unlike with many other pre-Socratics, we have quite a lot of his poems, and if you're ever curious, I didn't assign it as a reading, but you can look it up, and some of it is quite nice, I would say. But his poetry was dedicated to philosophical subjects. He especially contributed to epistemology, the theory of knowledge, and theology, which is the theory of, you may say, religion or God. Theos again is God in Greek. Okay, so in terms of religion, he criticized this popular Greek religion. He was talking a lot about it in his poems, and among other things, he criticized Homer and Hesiod for their conception of gods as, anthropomorphic, as human beings. So he was saying Homer and Hesiod have attributed to gods all sorts of things that are matters of reproach and censure among men: theft, adultery, mutual deception. So he thought that was ridiculous. He would say, men suppose that gods are brought to birth and have clothes and voice and shape like their own. But if oxen and horses or lions had hands and could draw and fashion works as men do, horses would draw gods shaped like horses, and lions like lions, making bodies of the gods resemble their own. To him that seemed completely ridiculous. So how did he think about it? He wasn't an atheist, of course. He thought about it as there's probably one God. One God. God is one, greatest among God and man, in no way like mortals, either in body or in mind. He sees as a whole, perceives as a whole, hears as a whole. Always he remains in the same place, not moving at all, nor indeed does it benefit him to go here and there at different times, but without toil he makes all things shiver by the impulse of his mind. So this idea of one eternal God, which is essentially outside of time and essentially outside of place even. So he remains in the same place in some sense, but which place is it? He's like everywhere. That kind of idea is what connects him to Eleatics, as you hopefully will see once we talk more about them. One God, completely different from the traditional gods of Homer and Hesiod. Epistemology, again, what is epistemology? Remember, this is a theory of knowledge. His theory of knowledge was one of the first skeptical ideas. Skepticism. What is a skepticism? Well, it basically is idea that we cannot really know the reality. He was saying, no man has seen, nor will there be anyone who knows the clear truth about the gods and about all the things I speak of. For even if a person should in fact say what has come to pass, nevertheless he himself doesn't know, but in all cases it's opinion that has been wrought. So what is he talking about? What does he mean? You cannot know, but there is an opinion. So we can distinguish three types of knowledge. Now, this is something which we will come back to many times in this class, and I think I even mentioned some of it before. So first of all, we can say that a certain fact, let's call it P, is true, right? We may not even be aware of it, but it is either true or it is not true. So again, let's make an example of there being a dog in an apartment next to mine. Right? There is an apartment right there. Let's say there is a dog. I may not even know there is a dog, but it is either true or not true. And let's say it is true that there is a dog. Now, number two type of knowledge I can have, which again is not really knowledge, but I may have an opinion. For some reason, I may think that there is a dog, right? Just believe it. Just think, well, I believe there is a dog. Now, that may be true, because if there is in fact a dog, and I have an opinion that there is a dog, that is true. Still, it would not be truly a knowledge. So, what is missing there? What do I need in order for me to say I know that there is a dog?
Seeing it, in this case?
Well, seeing it would help. So, in other words, justification. I need to have a justification of my belief. I need to be able to say DNA test. Well, that's a little extreme. I mean, what would DNA test tell you? That like you found a creature there, but you're not sure if it is a dog. So you want to investigate her DNA to make sure it is a dog. Well, I'm not sure if it actually even helps. Do we know like DNA of the dogs? It's a little bit of like gray area. I'm not going to go there because it's more of a biology. But anyway, I do need justification. How can I get this justification? Now, this is where the difficult part begins. Now, naturally, the best way would be for me to go there and see the dog. If I went there and I saw the dog, then I can say I know there's a dog for sure. I saw it. Now, are there any other ways for me to know there's a dog? Well, again, we talked about it last time, so without wasting too much time, I'll remind you that one other way I may hear it. I didn't go there, but I just hear it, right? I hear barking. So I say, there must be a dog there because it's barking every day. Now here I can be wrong, right? It's not as reliable. Why? Because what if they have just loudspeakers, very good loudspeakers, and they watch movies about dogs all the time? So that's why they're barking. But it's better than nothing. It's better than just believing there is a dog without any justification. The third way, a neighbor can come, visit me, talk to me and say, hey, by the way, I have a dog. So he could lie to me, but again, that would be better than me not having any justification. Now, coming back to Xenophanes now, why is he skeptic? Why is he saying, basically what he's saying is, number three, the knowledge, the definite knowledge there is a dog, we can't have it at all. He's saying you cannot be sure there is a dog, even if you go there and see it. Yeah, he could be lying too, but that's even more important. I went there, I saw the dog, but he's saying I still cannot be sure. Why can't I be sure? Okay, let me give you a hint. Have you guys seen the movie Matrix? Well, if you didn't, I definitely recommend it. And if you did, then you know what I'm talking about. So basically, what was happening in that movie? They were not actually living life. They were swimming in some sort of liquid with some wires attached to their heads. and those agents were feeding an information straight into their brain, making them think that they are going around, seeing dogs, seeing other beings. But were they actually doing that? No, they were swimming in liquid. So until you take this red pill or whatever and wake up and get out of this bubble where they keep you, you don't even know. You think you know, but you don't. So that is his idea. Skepticism, that's basically the idea. Even if you think you see the dog, even if you think you have the justification, you really don't. Because there's always this doubt you have. The doubt is you may still have some sort of an illusion. You may be dreaming. And how could you ever know if you were in the matrix, if they were feeding it straight into your brain? How would you ever find out until somebody gives you a red pill? What if they never do? What if there's no Morpheus who can give you a red pill? Then what? You would never find out, right? So that is his idea.
Isn't there a whole theory about how the life that we know it is an illusion and other stuff like that? Like,
there's many theories. We will talk about it throughout the class because some philosophers bring it up over and over again. But Xenophanes is probably one of the first, at least who we know of, who actually kind of, even though he did not describe the whole theory about it, but we see from his poetry that what he meant is we don't have the true knowledge and we can never have true knowledge, and that's what behind this idea, that to have true knowledge you really have to be something other than human. As long as we are human, all we have is this constant feed which goes into our brain. But how much of this feed is true, we cannot possibly know. So even if we see the dog, hear the dog, touch the dog, all of this is nothing but impulses going into our brain. They were not using these words, but the idea is the same, right? But we don't know if there really is a dog. All we know is that we have these images of the dog. Okay, let's go to the reading now. So just a few questions for extra credit. How many ways there are and what are they in the reading? Did you read it? Did you take a look at it? He talks about ways. It's kind of important, which is why I will talk about it myself, but I want to see if you guys were able to determine it. At least if you're close enough, I will count it as extra credit. Four and two? Well, which one is it? Pick one. Well, it's definitely not 1, and it's definitely not 4.
Isn't it 2? Because
okay,
it's
well,
like...
I guess by the process of elimination.
Okay.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, you can say 2 or 3. It's actually not entirely, definitely not 4. But at one point, he says at first that there are 2 ways, and then he talks about how one of them can be split into further 2, making a total of 3, right?
Okay.
But so essentially 2 is the correct answer, 3 would be correct answer, 1 is not a correct answer, and 4 definitely is not a correct answer.
Because I was a little bit confused about that because I thought of it being 2 ways because he said like there's like 2 different translations of what he said, and it's like whether it's like not possible. No wait, that it is not possible for it not to be, but the other one is like it's necessary for it to be. So that's where I got that from.
Okay, well, it can be confusing, I know. I will actually give it to Jesus because, Jesus, is it Jesus probably? Yeah, Jesus. Sorry about my pronunciation of your names. I think sometimes it's, yeah. So anyway, because I could see him typing it as simultaneously with you saying it. And so let's give it to him. But 2 is good enough of an answer. And what are they? Well, the way of that is and the way that is not. This is the 2 main ways he's saying. That is and that is not. Or what is and what is not. We will see why it's important. How is he showing them? Oh, who is showing them?
Was it the whole thing where he going from night to day as like a path?
But who?
Is being led by horses? Oh, the children of day, the sun, children's
The
sun
goddess. The goddess.
The goddess,
Jesus
sorry.
is right about it. The goddess is showing them. He's talking to the goddess this whole time, right? Yeah, there are children and night and day and all sorts of things, but he's talking to the goddess. Goddess is the one who's showing him and talking to him. Another final one, maybe a little tricky, but if you read it, you know. How old is Parmenides when he's on that journey? No, when he's on that journey. He may have been 65 when he wrote it. How old is he on that journey? It's there in the text. I can tell you that. I don't see the correct answer.
You just said old, so that's I think that's the correct.
He did say old, but it's not the correct answer. Because the correct answer is actually young. Okay, I guess nobody gets that. At one point, he's talking about being young. If you read it, you'll see. He's a young man. Anyway, okay, let's now look at the stuff because it's a fascinating stuff. So Parmenides is considered the first of the Eleatics and the first true Eleatic. While we say about Xenophanes as a founder in a sense, but the true Eleatic was Parmenides, and he lived between 515 and 450. He may have met Socrates because there is a dialogue by Plato called Parmenides, and in that dialogue Socrates is supposedly talking to Parmenides. Socrates would have been 19 years old at the time, 450. If it happened in 450, Socrates was 19. So that's quite young. Whether or not it actually happened, we don't know, because a lot of Plato's dialogues are actually fiction, as we will talk about when we get to them. Some of them are based on facts, but whether or not they actually based on facts or whether or not he was just making it all up, we don't know for sure. We know Socrates did exist, but when it comes to such things as whether he ever met Parmenides or whether it was just an invention for the purposes of, creating the dialogue, we don't know. He could have. Parmenides uses logic a lot more powerfully. He uses arguments very well. He considered to be an immaterialist. Remember what materialism is. So he is considered an immaterialist, and it is kind of a beginning of idealism. We will talk more about idealism later. So now let's look more at his theory. The fundamental reality of being can be spoken of as what is. So the two ways, what is and what is not. What is would be being. What exists? Reality. What is not would be nothing. Non-reality. So he's saying that being is one, and more importantly, remember when we talked about Heraclitus, to him everything changes. There's change everywhere. To Parmenides, it's an opposite of that. He's saying nothing changes. Change is an illusion. There is no change. Radical metaphysical monism, meaning everything is one and it doesn't change. Okay, so how does he justify that? The two ways. First of all, anything we can think or speak about either exists or doesn't exist. So it is what is, if it exists, what is not, if it doesn't exist. Anything that doesn't exist, what is not, is nothing. Right? But he says we cannot speak or think about nothing. So we cannot speak or think about what doesn't exist. Therefore, anything we can think or speak about does exist. A lot of people may be shocked about it and confused. So let's discuss it. Can we speak of something that doesn't exist?
Yes.
Give me an example.
Like for example, when something that hasn't been necessarily proven, so in our minds, it doesn't exist.
No, give me an example.
One sec. I'm just trying to think of something that like doesn't exist in the physical world.
Yeah, that's the problem. Give me an
Like
example.
a plane of
Something-
existence.
Huh?
Did you say ghosts? Like if you don't believe in them?
Ghosts, if you don't believe in them. Well, okay, but what is a ghost? Can you describe a ghost?
Like a spirit?
What is a
Bad
spirit?
aura, bad juju.
What
My
is a
head hurts. Please, I have a migraine. This is hard. Okay. But how do we know for sure that it doesn't exist?
Okay, well, hold on a second.
No, I'm not holding on.
Let me
I'm
explain
asking
a little bit
questions.
what he means, because I can see what you kind of yeah, it is a little bit confusing, but what he means is this. Suppose that we're talking about unicorns. That would be one example. Unicorn doesn't exist, right?
Okay.
But what is a unicorn? It's a horse with one horn. Horses exist, horns exist. Ghost, I don't know exactly how you imagine ghost, but whatever you imagine the ghost to be, you have a particular idea of something which actually does exist. Maybe like a mist of some sort, right? Or I don't know, an entity of some sort. So every time you do that, you bring concepts of things which do exist, you just put them together in the wrong way. So the idea is this, which is why at some point he says that there are actually three ways, because he says what is. You can also split it in two ways of opinion and reality. And opinion, human opinion, would be just putting things together in the wrong way. So unicorn is something which you have reality of existing horse and reality of existing horn, and you putting it together in the wrong way. So this is what he means by essentially everything you talk about does exist. You cannot talk about something which doesn't exist, because how would you talk about it?
Yeah,
What
because
words
even
would
if
you
it's
use?
not, even if it's not physical, it's in your mind, so it does exist. It's not.
Yeah, you
physical.
got this idea from somewhere.
Yeah, the
You're
idea
basing it
exists.
on some sort of reality. You're just putting it together in the wrong way. Otherwise, if you actually, like, that's also why, if you look at the paintings from medieval times, right, you will see a lot of them trying to paint hell, or I don't know, paradise or something. So what do you see in hell, for example? You see these weird animals, yeah, with horns and tails and ugly teeth. But those are all things we see every day in life, right? We see horns with a cow or something, or some horned animals. We see tails, like my cat. Sometimes you look at my cat and he looks like a little devil. Why? That's because they like to present devils as these cat-like creatures. But can we imagine something which we have never seen? No. Where would we get that? Right? So that's the idea. You cannot talk or imagine or even think about things which do not exist at all. All the things which we kind of think about or put together in our mind always exist. It's just that we may do it in a wrong way. What is not is just impossible. Now he takes it quite a bit further. He's saying, based on all this, that reality is completely unchanging. This is where he gets it from. He says whatever exists, exists, and there is nothing apart from that which exists. Things that exist can be known. You should use your reason or logos. One example of things which exist and you can use logos, the mathematical entities. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Note that this is eternal truth. It doesn't change. Right? It was like this 1,000 years ago. I'm pretty sure it will still be the fact 1,000 years from now. It will never be the fact that 2 plus 2 will become 5 or 3 or 2.5. So this is an example of things we can know and the things which are real. Now everything else is just not fully real. So reality itself is unchanging, and this is several of his theses which you can actually find in the reading if you read carefully. First of all, being of what is uncreated. Why is it uncreated? Nothing comes from nothing. Now let's look at how we talk about in physics about creation of the universe. We talk about Big Bang, right? What happened before the Big Bang? Why did Big Bang happen? Do we know that? We don't know that. Was there anything before the Big Bang? Well, if there was nothing before the Big Bang, then the big question is, how could Big Bang even happen? Where would Big Bang come from? Same thing, by the way, if you look at it from a religious point of view. Interestingly enough, you hit the same problem. Like, religion tells us that God created the world, right? Okay, very good. What created God?
God is omniscient and omnipresent, and
He is eternal, right?
yeah.
So you essentially give the same answer, but nothing comes from nothing. The world came from God, but God was always there. So in a sense, you may say the world was always there. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Because God, to create the world, was already present. And so creation of the world, in a sense, is just as some form of transformation. Because He did not take nothing. If it was nothing, there would be no God. God is already something.
Yeah, with Christians, because even Christians debate, like, where did God come from? And the answer is God just always was there. And it's one of the questions that Christians don't know the answer to, so they hope they'll get it when they reach heaven after death.
Exactly. So basically, when you cannot answer about the world and you try to say, where did the world come from? Well, God created it. You are just taking it one step further, and instead of saying, now the answer, the question instead of where did the world come from becomes, where did God come from? And you still have to answer essentially the same question, because nothing comes from nothing, right? So at some point you have to say, well, something was always there. Because if there was absolutely nothing, including no God, then where the hell would anything come from? So Parmenides was saying it was always there. Otherwise it wouldn't come. The second thing, he's saying being is unchanging and unchangeable and imperishable. Because if it could change, what it would change into? Right? It is being, and it's still being. So it's not changing into anything. It cannot change into nothing, or back from nothing into being. It stays being. And it's imperishable because, again, it cannot disappear. Right? Suppose even if you think about it in this way, if you destroy something, right? If you burn it or, I don't know, kill an animal, well, it doesn't go anywhere, right? Even if you burn, like there's all the particles are perhaps spreading into the atmosphere or whatever, but they're still there. It's just they are rearranged differently. You cannot completely annihilate something so that it would no longer be there at all. That's just impossible. And you can't even think about that. Okay, he was also saying being is one and indivisible. And why? Because if you divide being, what would mark the division? So you have being, you split it into two beings. What do you do it with? Do you take some sort of non-being knife? You can't, right? So he's saying it's always just being. Being is motionless. Why? Well, he's saying there is no empty space. He was advocating the idea that there cannot be empty space, because if the space is completely empty, then it is nothing. But there is no nothing. It cannot be nothing. so it has to be something. Well, you can say, well, how come we see the empty space? Well, first of all, there's air. But you can say, how about vacuum? Well, there's still something there, which kind of like, the space itself. So, from this point of view, it's not really empty. There's still some sort of a holder there. Empty space to him would be completely nothing, and there's no such thing. And also, they didn't know about vacuum at the time. This is, I guess, one of the problems too. We created vacuum way, way later. They were able to create vacuum. At the time, they didn't think there is such thing because it's very difficult to create vacuum, right? You will always have air try to get in. And you need some sort of sophisticated equipment in order to suck out all the air without, destroying the object. Anyway, he also thought that being is finite body in the same time. Infinite is indefinite and incomplete. Being homogeneous and evenly distributed throughout the universe, being is actually finite. So it's like a chunk, which seems strange and doesn't come together well with other things, but this is how he thought about it. And note that we also can see connection with God in particular, in Xenophanes. This is how we think of God, isn't it? We think God as one thing, right? Eternal, but in the same time, he kind of is one thing, but what's the end and the beginning of God? Well, he doesn't really have the end and the beginning. He's just this one undivisible thing, which is eternal, not in time, but in the same time, he is there. So that's kind of the idea of this being. Okay. And he thought that our senses are not to be trusted. We have the world as it appears to our senses. We have description of reality that is presented in logical arguments. So we should trust logical arguments and not our senses. Because you should always use logos, use reason. Only reason tells you the truth. Your senses are essentially lying to you. The whole change in reality is just an illusion. Reality doesn't change. Reality and being is one thing. You will see how interestingly Plato picks up this idea, and he was definitely greatly influenced by this. Let's have a little bit of a discussion now. So, is change an illusion? Think of yourself when you were younger, right? Are you still the same person? Hold on, yeah. Who is that?
Wow, is that you?
Is it?
I don't know.
I have no idea either. Looks like me. Well, yeah, it is me when I was 15 years old.
15?
15,
Your jawline looks amazing, sir.
Anyway, but the question here is it really me? And the same question any one of you guys can ask yourself, even though it probably wasn't as long when you were 15. But nonetheless, you have probably noticed that you change, right? Is there something which is still there? Are you the same person? And if you are, then what is it? What makes you the same person? Anybody?
I don't want to get into it. I mean, basically every single year you have new experiences that shape your personality, shape your knowledge, shape your opinions. So honestly, you can't always be the same. Like when you're a toddler, when you're a little stupid baby, it's very different from like now because you're not really the same person because you didn't know as much back then as you do now. So yeah.
Okay, but fair enough. However, if somebody committed murder, say 50 years ago, like that guy they caught in California, we still caught him and convicted him, right? Should we be doing that? I mean, if it's not the same person, or is it the same person?
Well, I'm the type of person who thinks that people can change but should be still reprimanded for their previous actions. So if let's say I killed someone, okay, not saying I did, but maybe I did. But if I did, like knowingly killed out of malicious, and then let's say 20 years later, I never got caught, but I feel terrible about it every single day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I really did kill someone 20 years ago, and now if someone comes to me like, 20 years ago you killed this man, and now we're going to arrest you, we found you, get into jail. I can't be like, but I changed, which is true, but I still have to be reprimanded for my actions, because actions have consequences.
So, but that also tells us that you are, at least in some way, the same person. Because if you changed completely, then it would be crazy to hold you responsible for the actions of the person who may have had the same name, but is no longer the same person. So what we are actually saying when we hold them responsible is, well, there's at least one part of them which is still the same. And this is an important part.
It's a complex thing, because for example, then will you say that once an addict is always an addict?
Well, this is a behavioral thing, but I mean, we are talking about a particular entity which can be called you, and if there is nothing like that, then of course it would be crazy to hold a person responsible for something which happened many years ago and that he or she no longer has anything in common with. However, when we are holding them responsible, we are actually affirming that no, there is definitely at least part there which is still there, and this is that person, and we call him like John or something, and we have a right to hold him responsible because many things may have changed, but that is still there.
I think that's the same person because...
Well, anyway, but just to sum it up, Parmenides would of course say there's definitely that one thing, and that is the thing which doesn't change, right? That is the real you, and real you is there and it doesn't change. You can also look at it this way. Suppose you're looking at it from the outside point of view. A person already died. He lived his entire life. That is him. His life started at point 0 and went to a point when he was, 80 years old. He died. This is him. This is already this complete picture. Same thing with, like, say, the movie. You're watching a movie on Netflix. Things are happening in real time for you. But the movie has already happened. Some other people already know what the end is. Right? So it's already one thing. It's an entity. It's the movie. It's already either good or bad. It's already either entertaining or not. And we can say the same thing about each one of us. Like, we are living life as a movie starting from a point 0 to point whatever. But looking from outside point of view, we can look at it as one thing which already happened.
I think comparing a human life to a movie is very not in a, like, it's a little bit incorrect, because a movie has been planned out from start to finish
By human beings.
but human beings, the decisions we take, like, unless, like, if you don't believe in God, because the idea of God is that gods know what you're doing, they know what you're gonna do, it's not your decision, it's theirs, you don't know it yet. But if, for example, an atheist or an agnostic, basically someone who doesn't believe in that ideology, for them, no one knows how their life is gonna really, like, end. I mean, ultimately, yeah, death, but the path that you take is a completely different
Okay,
thing.
let me then ask you this. Where does movie come from?
A lot of brainstorming. An idea.
Okay, so somebody is writing the screenplay, right?
Yes.
Can they twist it any way they want?
Yes.
So what's the difference with life then?
Because it has to be approved by other people. in the movie. A director can't just say, "Up, we're changing."
Well,
all
for
of
one
this
thing, you
right
can
now."
write a story and say, I don't want to change it. Maybe they're not going to turn it into a movie, maybe they will. I mean, many of this movies based on a book, right? The book is already written. Say, a book by Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. Well, I don't think you'll go back to Dostoevsky and ask him to change the ending. You can change the ending when you are making the movie, but the book's already there. Dostoevsky at some point decided how he wants to end it, and that's how he ended it. He could have done it any other way. So he also had complete liberty in terms of how he will put the story. But once it's finished, it is finished. The same thing with our life, isn't it? We can turn it any way we want, but once it's finished, it will be finished. And we no longer can go back and change it.
If we're gonna if we're gonna say, well, a movie ends and so does a life, I agree in that terms, but it's just like, in life there's so many different things that can go like absolutely unplanned, like you're not the one who's controlling it, whereas in a movie it's all like it's not out on a whim. It's not, no one's in actual danger.
Okay, now you're contradicting yourself, because you were just saying that director can come and say things. Well, that's the same thing. Yeah, when you write in the movie, somebody can come and say, you know what, they don't like how it's going here. Maybe you should change it a little bit. And that also kind of changes it. Okay, we cannot dwell on it too long, because there's still a lot of good stuff to come. Let's move on now. Zeno. Now we're moving to Zeno of Elea, who was a student of Parmenides. And he was actually, some say, his adopted son. Possibly, we don't know for a fact. Anyway, his idea was he was trying to prove that his teacher is right. So he specifically wrote a book to try to prove that. And his famous paradoxes are specifically meant for this. Reductio ad absurdum. This is in Latin meaning reducing to absurdity. This is how he was trying to prove it. Basically, how it works is, to refute a certain thesis, you say thesis A. You show that this thesis entails certain consequent, a thesis B, right? And then you can show that thesis B is impossible. And therefore, since A entails it, or you cannot have A without B, A also has to be rejected. So this is the idea, the kind of very roughly put idea of how reducing to absurdity works. Let's look at some of his paradoxes, which hopefully will also excite you. So the one famous paradox is Dichotomy Paradox. He had many of them. I just picked a couple. They all kind of go back to the same thing essentially. So suppose Homer wishes to walk to the end of the path, right? This is the path. This is Homer. This is the path. 1 mile or whatever. Before he gets to the end of it, he has to go to half of it, right? Before he gets to half of it, he has to go to 1/4 of it. Before he gets to 1/4 of it, he has to go to 1/8. And before that to 1/16. Before that to 1/32. Before that to 1/64. And so on and so forth. So, conclusion is, he will never start moving. Will he? Can you see the point there?
This path, are we talking about an infinite one or the one that actually does?
No, it is finite. It is 1 mile.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it is you can reach a mile. You can literally walk to a mile.
Let me show you what I mean. I'll put it on the board.
I understand it.
Okay, let me illustrate it a little bit. So he has to walk 1 mile, right? Before he walks 1 mile, he has to walk 0.5 mile.
Yes.
Before he walks 0.5, he has to walk 0.25.
Mm-hmm.
Before he does that, he has to walk 0.125. Is there an end to this division?
No, unless the determined goal is exactly a mile, exactly a half a mile.
No,
But like
never
that.
mind the goal.
No.
I'm asking you whether there's an end to the division. Suppose we are talking now about
No.
0.0000001.
Yeah, there is no end to that kind of division.
Yeah, you still have smaller distance, but that's the
Mhm.
problem. Do you see the problem here? You have to be able to find the point when you can no longer divide, but you can't.
As long as it's all natural numbers, it's just gonna keep going and
How
going.
about non-natural numbers? What numbers are going to help?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, let's look at the other paradox. It's similar. This is the famous Achilles and Tortoise. Achilles is in a foot race with Tortoise. Achilles allows the Tortoise head start of 100 meters. For example, you can put it 100 yards, whatever, doesn't matter. And then they both start in the same time. So this is what happens. This is Achilles, this is Tortoise, right? Achilles covers this distance in a certain period of time. I don't know, 10 seconds. In that same period of time, Tortoise, which is much slower, covers a smaller distance, right? Now Achilles starts now from here and covers the distance between himself and Tortoise in much less time, I don't know, 5 seconds or whatever. Tortoise covers certain distance in that period of time too. Note that it will continue indefinitely. In order for Achilles to cover next distance, which is still smaller, but it will still give Tortoise a little bit of time, and Tortoise will still move further. So essentially, Achilles will never be able to catch up with Tortoise. Even though it's moving slower, but it will always be ahead of him.
Like if the both of them are gonna keep the same speed without slowing down or without sprinting, that it's never gonna. Achilles is always gonna be slower.
No, he's always faster, but he will never catch up.
Okay.
He is faster because he covers this much faster.
Yeah, he covers the distance way faster.
Yeah,
than-
so in this
yeah.
case it is 50 meters, right? So he covers 50 meters in say 10 seconds. In the 10 seconds, Tortoise will only be able to cover 10 meters or whatever. Then he covers this 10 meters in appropriate fraction of time. But while he's doing that, Tortoise will move a little bit, wouldn't it? To cover this really tiny distance, he will still take some time, and Tortoise will move still a little bit. To cover that distance, again, will take him some time. So what is the problem here? Because experience obviously tells us that this is not how it
although
happens.
Achilles is faster, he will never be able to catch up.
Yeah, so what is the problem? Can you figure out what the problem is?
Like in a philosophical sense.
I know, that's the question. Melia is asking, Achilles is moving faster, so how could he not catch up? I don't know, how could he not? But logic tells us that he will not. Okay, I actually can tell you, because here's what we need. We need a chunk of time. We need an undividable chunk of time to solve this problem. We need to get to a chunk of time we can no longer divide. If we do, then the problem solves. Same thing with the distance. In order to stop the division, we need undividable chunk of distance. Can we find undividable chunk of time or undividable chunk of distance? Well, 0 is nothing. 0 is indeed undividable, but if the smallest distance is 0, that means there is nothing there. It means there is no distance. It means the reality is the illusion. That's actually the point which Parmenides made, and it's still with us. Okay, so now taking it to physics. If you guys know anything about physics, do you know about quantum physics? Yes. So does quantum physics work on macro level? No, it does not work on macro level. Macro physics and quantum physics are incompatible. They give answer to physical questions in different ways. It's actually one of the biggest problems today. You can Google it if you want. There is quantum physics, but it cannot explain macro reality. And there is macro physics, which cannot explain quantum physics. Because quantum physics assumes these tiny little chunks, which can no longer be divided, chunks of reality. And if you do that, then there are certain things which you can no longer work with. And we have, in math also, we have the continuum, right? The calculus works with continuum, which can be infinitely divided. And we have discrete math, which works with chunks, like the unities. They are separate. They cannot be combined, because if you combine them, that doesn't make any sense for us. This is a paradox. That question has not been answered in 2,500 years. And if somebody tells you that it has, they're lying. There is lots of good work done on it, and lots of smart people tried. But the only way we can answer this, and this, of course, is a very reasonable answer, is that, well, experience tells us that this is not how it is. Experience tells us that Achilles will catch up, and it's fair enough. But what experience tells us is not explained by either science or logic. Science and logic hit the wall here, and that's it. They just tell us, okay, well, somehow it happens. And we assume, if we make certain assumptions, such as the smallest chunk of time, then we can explain it. But then the question is, how can there be a smallest chunk of time? The smallest undividable chunk of time, what is it? Like 1/10 of a second? How come we cannot get 1/100 of a second? Right? Can time be just bunch of chunks? Anyway, this is the problem which has been addressed by him. So, okay, let's not do this discussion because we kind of already been discussing it. But again, note that similarity with Christian religion is God, because God is above time, right? He is both future and past, and he also is undivisible. You can say that in a sense that one of the ways to answer this problem is that this is a glitch in the matrix. This is a glitch in the matrix. This is where we can get an idea that perhaps we are swimming in some sort of liquid, because logical answers about reality hit the wall. They cannot answer to us how does reality work. And many of the philosophers actually based on that, for example, when we get to Kant, I can give you a preview that Kant thought that both time and space are not real. This is just part of our internal software, how we accept reality. But reality itself does not have time and does not have space. It's been kind of inserted into our mind. You may say, well, it's not how Kant would put it, but I can say in order for us to be able to operate. But in the same time, those are not real entities. Whether time and space are real, that's a very philosophical question. Anyway, so one of the attempts to answer this was the next group of philosophers called pluralists. Pluralists, including Anaxagoras and Empedocles, were actually trying to answer these questions in their own way. And why are they called pluralists? Because they were no longer saying there's just one thing. The way for them to answer it was that there are multiple things. And if you accept multiple things, then you kind of get a little bit better. They were trying to answer it. So first let's look at Anaxagoras. He lived between 500 and 428. The first philosopher to actually settle in Athens, which is capital of Greece. Remember the previous ones were like where the Turkey is now, where Italy is now. He was in Athens. he is mentioned in Apology, in the reading which we have for next week. Anaxagoras was basically trying to answer this problem, and he was saying, okay, there are no smallest element, everything is in everything. Everything has a portion in everything. So it's kind of like this big mix. He was saying, for example, if you take blood has a little bit of bone in it, and a little bit of stone, and a little bit of this and that, but mostly it's blood, which is why it is blood. Stone also has a bit of blood, a bit of rock, a bit of everything, but it's mostly stone. Bread has a little bit of bone, a little bit of blood, a little bit of excrements, and so on, which is why when we eat bread, we become blood, and we become bone, and we also have excrements, because that's when it's separated. We separate it, right? And some part of it. So everything is mixed with everything. There's really no smallest element at all. It's like infinite mix of this microscopic tiny little stuff. And that tiny little stuff, yeah.
Can I have a quick question? You can feel free to ignore it, but for example, so it's possible then for a rock on the highest, like on Mount Everest, a rock on Mount Everest has some microscopic mixture of something that you're going to find only in the tropical forest or only like on a seaweed or something because someone like came on the rock and touched it and they had these like little particles. So is that what?
Yes.
Like, okay.
And it will have tiny little particles of you and of me and of everything, but very tiny. Very small amount. We have a lot more of it. Anyway, so this is the idea. And he also thought there is a separate entity called mind, or nous in Greek. And that nous has power over all things that have life. So everything which has life, in addition to everything else, has this mind. Right? So I am not just rock or bread and whatever other things, I am also mind, and so are you, and so is my cat, but not rock. Rock doesn't have mind. Rock is just a rock. But everything which is alive has this mind, and mind is like basically everywhere, and it has power over the whole revolution. So this is what began revolving at the beginning, the mind. Interesting idea, right? So he introduces something which is not physical, not a matter. He's saying mind did not create matter. Matter is eternal, it was always there. But mind is kind of behind the living things. We have mind, but not only us. Animals also, all sorts of animals, plants have mind, everything which is alive has mind. Socrates actually in one of the dialogues picks up on that, but he says, well, Anaxagoras and his mind are fairly useless. They don't seem to do much of a work. No causal power. How, like they are there, but not really doing anything by themselves. So next philosopher in that group, in Pluralists, was Empedocles, who note that Anaxagoras had some problems with his ideas, right? One of the problems you may immediately notice is like, okay, but how then you distinguish, for example, a gold from silver or something? Shouldn't there be some sort of a stuff called gold if there's everything in everything? Shouldn't there be some pure gold which we can at least theoretically pull out of there? Like it creates some sort of weird logical problems which you cannot really solve. We don't know how he was answering it because we only have fragments of his work, but Empedocles didn't think it made very much sense, so he actually tried to preserve this one being idea, but explain it a little bit better using some of the Pythagorean ideas, Pythagorean religion. And in particular, he was saying that there are four, what he called roots within everything, or four fundamental elements, you may say, even though they were not using the word element at the time. Earth, air, fire, and water. Note that previously they thought it was just one element, either one, water, everything is made of water, or everything is made of air. So now he's saying, no, there's actually 4 of them, and they can be in different combination. So that actually explains why things are different. For example, bone, he would say, is 2 parts earth, 2 parts water, and 4 parts fire. You put them in this kind of proportion and you get bone. You put them in different proportion, you may get blood or stone or something else. So everything is like these 4 elements, but hooked up in different combinations. And why is everything changing? He said there are 2 motions which rule the world: love and strife. So love is a principle of unity. It tries to unite things. Strife, on the other hand, breaks things up. It's the principle of division. And both of them are constantly kind of fighting, which is why things hooking up and then breaking up again. Hooking up and breaking up. Just like, you with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Getting together and then breaking up. So this is how it always is with everything. And this is love and strife kind of working through the universe, because otherwise just these 4 elements, it doesn't explain it, right? Okay, fair enough, there's 4 elements, water, fire, whatever, but how do they change? How do they hook up? Well, because of love and strife. Love and strife sometimes put them together and sometimes break them apart. He also thought that there was no empty space. That's another interesting thing. He still continued this no empty space thing, and because he based it all on Pythagorean religion, he thought that the entire thing is eternal. This eternal occurrence, remember the idea of eternal occurrence, he picked it up. So the entire cosmic cycle continues and goes round and round, and everything repeats again and again. You live your life one more time, one more time, one more time. It's driven by the love and strife, but it repeats itself constantly. And finally, we get to Democritus. Democritus and the Atomists. We actually think that the first who came up with the idea of the atom was not Democritus, but Leucippus. However, we don't know very much about Leucippus other than the fact that he was a teacher of Democritus. Democritus, we have some of his work, we know about his ideas, so how is he different? He is the first one who introduced this idea of an atom, right? It is a very modern idea. Why is it modern? Because it was picked up by during the modern times, and we will talk about it later, as an explanation of how reality works. An idea of an atom actually, atomos in Greek, means a thing that cannot be divided. So note that this is the idea of this chunk of reality, which helps us to understand reality, because if we think of everything as those little chunks, then it kind of gives us an explanation we need as to how reality works. It solves all these paradoxes. What's the problem now? Can we split the atom? Can we? Yes,
Yeah,
we did. Didn't we?
But it results in a not so good of a
The explosion happened.
Yeah, boom, boom.
But we split the atom, and we discovered that that's not the smallest one. We discovered that there is a nucleus, there's those electrons going around it, and the nucleus contains protons and neutrons. But then we were able to split even them, and we discovered there are quarks. And then we were able to come up with the theory of strings, which are inside quarks. And so the story still continues, right? We didn't actually explain anything, but we did get further in our understanding of reality. But the idea of atoms, like I said, for centuries, it actually was something which we used in science. And we still think of them as atoms, except now we understand they can be split. They are not chunks of reality which can no longer be split. So how did he explain change? Well, relations between atoms. They actually thought that atoms are like these little chunks, but they are a little different. Some of them are spiky, and other ones are more round. And they have little hooks, so they hook up together, and when they hook up together really well, then that's very hard material, like steel, for example, right? Steel is very hard. You can you cannot break it apart. Why? Because the atoms of steel have very good hooks, so you can't split them apart. But something like, say, butter, the hooks between the atoms, they are not very good, so you can very easily cut it. That's their explanation. They also try to explain knowledge again, epistemology. They were saying, well, atoms are flying off, colliding, and this is how our senses work. Our senses pick up those atoms. So when we smell something, those atoms fly into our nose, and also atoms kind of hit our eyes. They kind of bounce from objects and go into our eyes, so this is how we see things. And they also can get into our ears. This is how we hear things. So it's all about the atoms. Atoms are everywhere. However, they also thought that there are two types of knowledge: the true-born knowledge and the bastard knowledge. And they thought that knowledge we get from our senses actually is a bastard knowledge. It's not true knowledge. Because again, just going back to Parmenides, this idea that what we can sense, this world, the constantly changing world, is not fully real. The fully real world is unchanging. 2 + 2 = 4, that's fully real. And that can only be accessed by our reason, by logos. Only logos can get us to those true things, the way they are, including atoms, because note that atoms do not change either. They like hook up together, but the atom itself, it's unchanging. It's like this chunk, and it's always chunk. You cannot split it, you cannot make it green, you cannot heat it up. It's all about how it interacts with other atoms, but atom itself is this unchanging chunk of reality. And